He slid the folder across her desk like he was closing a business deal. Inside, photographs, financial records, psychological evaluations, the private lives of 12 women he had never met. "I want full profiles before any introduction," Lucian Moretti said. "Background checks, net worth verification, emotional stability assessments." Amara Brooks didn't touch the folder. She looked at this man, this powerful, expensive, terrifyingly confident man, and felt something settle quietly in her chest. Not fear, not admiration, pity. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "In my professional opinion, you are not emotionally ready for a relationship with any woman." The room stopped breathing. His assistant went pale. His mother covered her mouth. 3 bodyguards exchanged glances that said the same thing. Nobody speaks to him like that. Nobody. If that moment sounds like something from a movie, wait until you hear what he said next. If this story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. I release new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning Amara Brooks decided she was done apologizing for existing, she was standing in the elevator of a midtown Manhattan office building, watching a woman in a tailored blazer look her up and down with the particular expression people use when they think they're being subtle. They were never subtle. Amara had learned to read that look the way other people read weather, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the almost imperceptible shift away, the way the woman's gaze moved from Amara's face to her body and then back to her phone, having made some private judgment she would never say out loud. Amara pressed the button for the 14th floor and stood a little straighter. She was 41 years old. She had built her matchmaking agency from a single desk in a borrowed office in Brooklyn to a reputable firm with a 12-month waiting list. She had helped 237 people find lasting relationships. She had been featured in New York Magazine, interviewed on 3 podcasts, and referenced in a Harvard Business School study about behavioral compatibility modeling. She was also, by any conventional measurement, a plus-size black woman in a city that had very specific ideas about what a love expert was supposed to look like. The elevator opened. Amara walked out without looking back. Her 11 o'clock appointment was already waiting. She knew the moment she stepped into the reception area that something was different. Her assistant, Dana, was standing behind her desk with the posture of someone trying very hard to look normal while internally screaming. There were 2 men in dark suits near the window who were not clients. Their jackets fit too well and they stood too still, and they were watching the door with the calm, patient attention of people professionally trained to notice everything. "Dana," Amara kept her voice even. "Who's here?" Dana mouthed something that looked like it might have been a name, but no sound came out. "She's been doing that for 10 minutes, said the woman sitting in the corner chair. Amara turned. The woman was perhaps 70, with silver hair pinned neatly at the base of her neck, and the kind of posture that suggested a life lived in formal rooms. She was dressed beautifully, not expensively, though she was certainly that too. There was a difference. Her clothing fit her like clothing was supposed to fit a person, like she had never once grabbed something off a rack and prayed it would work. She wore a single strand of pearls and no other jewelry, and her hands were folded in her lap with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that patience was a form of power. "Vivienne Moretti," the woman said, and she smiled warmly. "My son will be a few minutes late. He's finishing a call." "Mrs. Moretti." Amara came forward and shook her hand. "It's a pleasure. Though I have to say, I was under the impression this was a consultation for a private client referred through the Valentine Society." "My son is a private client." Vivian's smile didn't waver. "He simply has additional context." It was, Amara would reflect later, the most elegant understatement she had ever heard. Lucian Moretti arrived 7 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him, not because he was loud, he wasn't, but because the energy in the room changed when the door opened. The 2 men near the window straightened almost imperceptibly. Dana found something urgent to do with her keyboard. Even Vivian, composed as she was, sat up slightly. He was tall, dark-haired with threads of silver at the temples. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Amara's first car, and he moved through the office the way people move through spaces they have already decided belong to them. He scanned the room in 1 second. She clocked it, 1 second flat. and his eyes landed on Amara with the same quality of assessment she had seen him apply to everything else. Calculating, thorough, entirely without warmth. Ms. Brooks. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, professional, and brief. Mr. Moretti. She matched it exactly. He sat down without being invited to. He set a slim leather portfolio on the corner of her desk, not in front of him, not between them. On the corner, like he was marking territory without making a scene of it. Amara noticed everything. She always did. I understand you come highly recommended, he said. The Valentine Society's director assured me your methodology is thorough. It is. I'd like to understand the process before we begin. He opened the portfolio. I've prepared a framework for the candidate evaluation criteria. Amara looked at the first page. Then she looked up. You've prepared a framework. Compatibility metrics, educational background requirements, a psychological profile template I'd like each candidate to complete before any introduction is made. He turned to the second page. Additionally, I'll need financial documentation and a full background investigation for anyone seriously considered. I trust that falls within your firm's capabilities. The silence in the room lasted exactly 3 seconds. Mr. Moretti, Amara said, my firm doesn't conduct background investigations. You can contract them out. I'll cover the cost. We won't be contracting them out either. He looked up from the portfolio for the first time, and she saw it then, the slight recalibration. The fraction of a second when he realized this conversation was not going the way he had planned. Ms. Brooks, the women I meet will be entering my world. For their protection as much as my own, due diligence, Amara said, is how you evaluate a business acquisition. I help people find relationships. She folded her hands on her desk. Those are different things. He set down the portfolio. I'm offering to pay whatever rate you require. This isn't about your rate. Then what is it about? It's about the fact that you walked in here with a 40-page document explaining what kind of woman you want, and in 40 minutes of conversation you have not once asked me a single question about who you actually are. She paused. Which tells me more than any psychological profile could. Vivian, in the corner, made no sound. But Amara saw her hands unfold in her lap. Lucien Moretti was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled in the way that voices get when they are working to stay controlled. I'm here because my mother requested it. I'm cooperating as a professional courtesy. That's honest, Amara said. That's the first honest thing you've said. I've been entirely honest. You've been accurate. That's different. She leaned back slightly. Mr. Moretti, I've been doing this for 15 years. I have a waiting list of clients who are genuinely ready to build something with another person. My time is limited and my standards for who I take on are not negotiable. She looked at him steadily. In my professional opinion, you are not emotionally ready for a relationship with any woman on my list. The two men near the window didn't move. They didn't look at each other. They stared straight ahead with the focused non-expression of people who have been trained not to react. And the very effort of that non-reaction told Amara exactly how unusual this moment was. Lucien Moretti sat very still. Repeat that, he said quietly. I don't think I need to. Ms. Brooks. His voice had dropped, just slightly. Do you know who I am? You're a man who came to a matchmaker's office with a 40-page screening document instead of a single honest answer about what you're afraid of. She kept her tone professional, almost kind. That's who you are in this room. It was Vivian who spoke next, and her voice, when she finally used it, was the voice of someone releasing a breath they had been holding for a very long time. Amara. She said her name like they were old friends, though they had met 20 minutes ago. My son doesn't only run his father's business interests. A pause. He runs the rest of them too. Amara turned to look at her. Vivian's expression was not theatrical. It was tired. The way mothers get tired of things they cannot change and cannot leave. He has been running the Moretti organization for 11 years. All of it. The Moretti organization. Amara knew the name. Anyone who had spent more than 3 months in New York City and paid any attention to anything knew the name. It appeared occasionally in newspaper articles that were carefully worded and never quite said anything specific. It came up in conversations at certain kinds of dinners where people lowered their voices. It was the kind of name that meant things that were never written down. She looked at Lucien. He had not moved. He was watching her the way he had watched the room when he walked in, methodically, waiting to see which way she would go. And there it was. The moment. The one where Amara Brooks was supposed to remember that she was a small business owner sitting across from a man who could make problems disappear in ways that had nothing to do with lawyers. She took a breath. "Mrs. Moretti," she said, "I appreciate you telling me. Truly." She folded her hands. "It doesn't change my assessment." Lucien Moretti blinked. It was the smallest possible expression of surprise, but on that face, it was enormous. "You are emotionally unavailable," Amara continued, her voice steady as riverstone. "You substitute control for intimacy. You've walked into a room designed for vulnerability and tried to turn it into a boardroom, and you've spent this entire meeting deciding whether I'm a problem to manage rather than a person to speak to." She looked at him without flinching. "Those are not qualities that serve a relationship. They are qualities that end them." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Then Lucien Moretti did something none of the three other people present had expected. He laughed, not a warm laugh, not a delighted laugh. It was a short, low sound, more surprised than amused, like a man who had just encountered something he didn't have a category for. "You're serious," he said. "Completely." He picked up his portfolio, closed it, set it on the desk with the careful precision of someone who needed a moment to think. Then he looked at her again, and this time the calculating quality in his eyes had been replaced by something she couldn't immediately name. Curiosity, maybe. Reluctant and unnerving. 30 days, he said. Amara blinked. "Excuse me?" "Give me 30 days. Introduce me to women. If not one of them interests me enough to see twice, I'll accept your professional assessment and we'll conclude the arrangement." He tilted his head slightly. "But if you're wrong..." "I'm not wrong. If you're wrong, you acknowledge that your methodology has a blind spot." He paused. "I suspect you don't like the idea of being wrong." It was, she had to admit, a remarkably accurate thing to say about her. She thought about her waiting list. She thought about the 12 clients currently in active matching processes, each of whom needed her full attention. She thought about the 3 years of painstaking reputation building that had gotten her into rooms where people like Vivienne Moretti made referrals. She thought about the 40-page portfolio sitting on the corner of her desk, and the 2 silent men near the window, and the way this man had walked into her office and tried to turn love into a procurement process. 30 days, she said. 30 days. My methodology, my questions, my process. You don't get to request files, run background checks, or set criteria. She met his eyes. You show up, you talk to people, you answer my questions honestly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What questions? The ones you've been avoiding your entire adult life. Another pause. Vivienne, in the corner, was the picture of composure, but her hands had found each other again in her lap, and she was holding them tightly. "Fine," Lucien said. "Fine," Amara said. He stood, buttoned his jacket with 2 precise movements, picked up the portfolio. "Monday, 9 a.m., Amara said. Without the portfolio. He nodded once and walked out. The 2 men followed without a word. The door closed behind them with a soft, decisive click. Dana emerged from behind her desk like a swimmer surfacing. "Amara," her voice was a whisper. "Do you know who—" "Yes," Amara said, "and you just—" "Yes." "Are you—" Dana stopped. Tried again. "Are you okay?" Amara looked at the door for a long moment. Her heart was doing something it didn't usually do during consultations. Something irregular and inconvenient and entirely unprofessional. "I'm fine," she said. She was not entirely fine, but she was not afraid either, and on that particular Monday morning, in that particular office, with that particular man's footsteps still fading in the hallway, not being afraid felt like the most important thing in the world. Vivienne Moretti had not moved from her corner chair. When Amara turned to her, the older woman was watching her with an expression that was quietly, unmistakably hopeful. "He's never agreed to anything like this before," Vivienne said softly. "I know." He said yes. "I noticed." Vivienne looked at the door her son had walked through, and for a moment her face held something private and aching, The love of a mother who has watched her child build walls so high and so thick that she can no longer see the person inside them. Be patient with him, Vivian said. He's not what he looks like. Amara thought about the 40-page portfolio. She thought about background investigations and financial documentation and emotional stability assessments. Mrs. Moretti, she said gently, none of us are. Vivian smiled. It was a full, unguarded smile, the kind that rearranges a person's whole face, and in that moment, Amara saw exactly where Lucian Moretti had gotten his eyes. She walked Vivian to the elevator. She came back to her desk. She sat down. She pulled the 40-page portfolio toward her and opened it to the first page. At the top, in clean serif font, was a header that read, Candidate Evaluation Framework, Revised Draft 7, Revised Draft 7. He had rewritten this document 7 times. Amara sat with that for a long moment. Then she closed the portfolio, set it in her bottom drawer, and opened her client calendar. 30 days, she thought. She had 30 days to prove to a Mafia boss that he didn't know the first thing about love. She had proven harder things. She told herself that with complete conviction, sitting alone in her office with the city humming 14 floors below her, not yet knowing that the hardest thing she would face in the next 30 days wouldn't be Lucian Moretti's walls. It would be her own. Monday arrived the way bad ideas always do, faster than expected and with worse weather than promised. Amara was at her desk by 7:30, which was 45 minutes earlier than usual, a fact she refused to examine too closely. She told herself it was because she had paperwork to review. She had 3 other clients in active matching processes, 2 of whom were reaching critical decision points and needed her attention. She had a business to run. That was the reason. It had nothing to do with needing to feel settled before he walked in. Dana arrived at 8 and immediately read the room the way she always did. Like a woman who had spent 6 years working for Amara and had learned that the temperature of the office in the morning told you everything you needed to know about what the day was going to demand. Coffee's already made, Amara said without looking up. I can see that. Dana set her bag down slowly. You made a full pot. I wanted coffee. You usually make 1 cup. Donna. I'm just noting the pot. Amara looked up. Please don't note the pot. Dana pressed her lips together in the specific way that meant she had 17 things to say and was heroically choosing to say none of them. She sat down at her desk. She opened her computer. She was quiet for approximately 90 seconds. What time is he coming? 9. Is he bringing the men in the jackets? I have no idea. Should I treat him like any other client? Amara said. That's all. Dana nodded. She typed something. Then, very quietly, almost to herself, he's not any other client. Amara didn't answer because there was no honest answer to give. He arrived at 8:58. No portfolio. He was wearing a different suit, dark navy this time, no tie. And he came alone. No men in jackets, no assistant trailing behind him with a tablet. He walked in, nodded at Dana without looking at her, and stood in front of Amara's open office door the way people stand in front of things they're deciding whether to enter. You're 2 minutes early, Amara said. I'm always early? Sit down, Mr. Moretti. He sat, and for the first time since she'd met him, he did it without first establishing where the exits were. Or if he did, he was better at hiding it. Amara had a yellow legal pad on her desk and a pen she'd had since graduate school, the kind with a chewed cap that she kept meaning to throw away. She picked it up now and looked at him. I'm going to ask you questions. Some of them will feel irrelevant. Answer them anyway. I'll answer the ones that are relevant. Then this will take longer than 30 days. She clicked the pen. When did you last feel genuinely surprised by someone? He looked at her for a beat. Friday. Who surprised you? You did. Amara wrote nothing. She looked at the pad, then back at him. What did your father want for you before you took over the organization? What did he actually want? The change was slight, a fraction of a degree, the angle of his jaw. The way his hands, which had been resting on the arms of the chair with complete stillness, shifted almost imperceptibly. That's not relevant to matchmaking. Everything is relevant to matchmaking. Answer the question. A long pause. He looked past her for a moment, toward the window. The city was doing what it always did out there. Moving, indifferent, enormous. He wanted me to study architecture, Lucian said. He thought I had the patience for it. Did you? I had the patience for a lot of things. His eyes came back to her. I chose differently. Or the choice was made for you. Ms. Brooks. Amara. She said it without thinking, then decided not to take it back. If we're going to spend 30 days talking about the most private parts of your life, you can call me by my first name. He looked at her for a moment with that expression she was beginning to identify. The one that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite interest, but lived somewhere uncomfortable between the two. Amara, he said, like he was testing the weight of it. The choice was made for you, she repeated. Not a question this time. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She wrote something on the pad. He watched her write it. She could feel him wanting to see what it was, and she angled it slightly away from him, not dramatically, just enough to make the point. What are you writing? He asked. Notes? About what? About you. I'd like to see them. I know you would. She set the pen down. Tell me about the last relationship you were in. Not what happened at the end. Tell me what it felt like at the beginning, when it was still good. The silence this time had a different quality. Heavier. Not the silence of a man choosing his words. The silence of a man deciding whether to admit he was standing in territory he didn't have a map for. 3 years ago, he said finally. Her name was Sophia. What did you like about her? She was direct. She said what she meant. That's what you appreciated about her. Yes. What did you like about her? He paused, recognized the distinction. She laughed at things other people thought they weren't allowed to laugh at. A pause. She wasn't afraid of quiet. What happened? She left. Why? She said. He stopped, restarted. She said she felt like she was living with someone who was always braced for impact, that she couldn't touch me without feeling like I was calculating whether it was safe to be touched. Amara didn't write anything. She just looked at him. She wasn't wrong, he said, and it came out flat and factual, the way people state things they have spent a long time making peace with. No, Amara said. She probably wasn't. He looked at her sharply, like he had expected softness. Like everybody always gave him softness when he said something true and painful about himself. The consolation prize people hand to powerful men who admit weakness. The reassurance that they're not so bad after all. She didn't give it to him. So you knew she was right, Amara said, and you let her leave anyway. I didn't. He stopped. His jaw worked. It wasn't that simple. It rarely is. But here you are 3 years later with a 40-page framework for evaluating women. So I'm asking, what did you do with what Sophia told you? I ran my organization. That's not an answer. That's the only answer I have. He said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. Not everything heals, Amara. Some things you just carry. The room was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a cab horn. A distant siren. The city not noticing or caring about anything happening on the 14th floor. All right, Amara said. She picked up her pen again. Tell me what you want. Not what's on your list, not what you think you should want. Tell me what you actually want when you imagine not being alone. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Someone who doesn't perform, he said finally. Everyone performs. Around me, around money, around the name. I want someone who says an honest thing even when the honest thing is inconvenient. He paused. Someone who doesn't need me to be anything specific in order to be okay. Amara wrote that down. Okay, she said. I can work with that. The first introduction happened 4 days later. Her name was Priya Kapoor, and she was a cardiothoracic surgeon who had come to Amara 8 months ago looking for someone emotionally substantial. Priya was brilliant, composed, deeply funny in the way that people get funny when their work requires them to be serious all the time. She had 4 failed relationships behind her, all with men who couldn't handle her schedule, and she had specifically requested someone who wasn't threatened by competence. Amara had hesitated before choosing her. She had gone through her active client list 3 times, written names down, crossed them out, rewritten them. She was aware, with the professional clarity she prided herself on, that she was being unusually careful. She told herself it was because Lucien was an unusual case. The lunch was at a quiet Italian place in the West Village that Amara had used for introductions before. Good acoustics, unhurried service, no one looking over their shoulder at famous faces. She sat them across from each other and took a corner chair slightly removed, the way she always did for first meetings. Present enough to observe, distant enough to allow something real to happen. Something real did not immediately happen. Priya was warm and sharp and asked good questions. Lucien answered them with the polished precision of a man who had conducted thousands of high-stakes meetings. He was technically perfect. He made eye contact. He asked follow-up questions. He did not interrupt. He was also, unmistakably, not there. Amara watched his hands. They were still on the table in a way that was different from relaxed, the stillness of a man performing patience rather than feeling it. She watched his eyes, which moved between Priya's face and a point somewhere past her left shoulder, not obviously, but enough. Priya was good at reading rooms. She was a surgeon. She had to be. After 40 minutes, Priya touched her water glass lightly and said, with a small, precise smile, "Lucien, what actually interests you? Not about me specifically, just in the world. What do you find genuinely interesting?" He looked at her like the question had caught him somewhere soft. "Architecture," he said, and it came out different from everything else he'd said. Less controlled. More like something that had escaped than something he'd released. Priya lit up. She had done her residency in Chicago, and she started talking about the Farnsworth house, about the way glass could be both shelter and exposure, about a building she'd seen in Japan where the structure existed in conversation with a particular quality of light. And for the next 12 minutes, Lucien Moretti sat across from an accomplished woman who was genuinely fascinating and talked about something he had loved as a young person before the world rerouted him. And Amara watched his face do the thing it never did. Go soft. Not tender. Not romantic. Just open. The way faces get when they forget to be defended. She drove back to the office and sat at her desk and stared at her yellow pad for a long time. She wrote architecture and circled it. She did not examine what she felt while she watched him listen to Priya talk about glass and light, and the way buildings could contain the people inside them without crushing them. She didn't examine it because she recognized it, and she didn't have room for it. The second introduction was a mistake, and Amara knew it before the appetizers arrived. Her name was Cassandra Webb, and she was a gallery owner from the Upper East Side who had specifically requested a partner with gravitas. She had asked Amara during their consultation what she meant by gravitas, and Cassandra had said, with complete sincerity, someone the room changes for when they walk in. Amara had known even then that it was a warning sign. She had taken Cassandra on anyway because she was technically qualified for the waiting list, had done her intake work seriously, and had shown real self-awareness in their follow-up sessions. She had not anticipated that Cassandra's self-awareness would evaporate entirely in the presence of a man with Lucien's particular specific gravity. Within 15 minutes, Cassandra was performing. There was no other word for it. She laughed half a beat too late, angled herself slightly toward him in the way that people do when they are trying to be the person they think you want, and twice she changed positions that she had stated clearly in her intake profile, on travel, on family, on what she called the architecture of daily life, changing them without blinking, without apparently noticing she was doing it, because the man across the table seemed to believe something different. Lucien noticed. Amara watched him notice, watched the slight cooling behind his eyes, the way his posture, which had been fractionally more open than usual, settled back into its default configuration. By the time the entrees arrived, he had retreated fully behind the polished professional courtesy that she was beginning to understand was not actually a wall. It was camouflage. On the way out, walking to the curb, he was quiet for half a block. "She lied about Rome," he said finally. "I know. She said she'd never been interested in travel during the first 20 minutes. Then she told me Rome was her second home." "I know." He looked at her sideways. "You saw it." "I see everything." "Then why?" "Because I needed to see if you would," she said. He stopped walking. She had taken 2 more steps before she realized it and turned back. He was standing on the sidewalk with the late afternoon light catching the silver in his hair and looking at her with an expression she could not fully read. "You were testing me," he said. "I was learning you." "That's the same thing." "It's really not." She held his gaze. "You passed, if that helps." It clearly did not help. He started walking again, and she fell into step beside him, and for 3 blocks neither of them said anything, and the silence had a texture to it that Amara was trying not to pay attention to. "The surgeon," he said finally. "Priya." What about her? She was interesting. Amara felt something in her chest make a small, complicated movement. She's exceptional. You'd like to see her again? He thought about it. No. She looked at him. Why not? She wasn't looking for me. He said it without self-pity, just observation. She was looking for someone easier, someone whose quiet didn't cost anything. I understood her. A pause. I didn't want her. Amara thought about that for the rest of the walk back. She thought about it that evening. She thought about what it meant that a man whose entire approach to love had been surveillance and criteria had just articulated something more emotionally nuanced than half the therapists she'd referred clients to. She thought about what it meant that she kept thinking about what he said. The third session was not an introduction. It was just the two of them, which had not been planned, but Amara's scheduled candidate had canceled with food poisoning, and she had a choice between rescheduling Lucian entirely or using the hour for what she sometimes called calibration. No introduction, just conversation. Understanding what was underneath. She hadn't planned to tell him about her mother. That happened by accident, the way things do when two people are in a room together for long enough and the conversation finds its own level. She had been asking him about the last time he trusted someone without knowing whether it was safe to trust them. And he had answered, but carefully, but honestly, more honestly than she'd expected. And then, in the silence that followed, he'd asked the same question back. She should have redirected. That was the professional move. Instead, she said, "My mother. I was 26. I told her I was starting the agency instead of taking the corporate consulting job, and I didn't know if she'd understand, and I told her anyway." She looked at her pen. "She took me to dinner and ordered champagne and said, 'You've always known things other people take years to figure out. I trust that.'" When she looked up, Lucian was watching her with the focused quality of a man storing something carefully. "She's still alive?" he asked. "No, she died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She said it simply, without the usual performance of being fine about it. He nodded. Not with pity, just with recognition, the way people nod when they understand an exact kind of loss. "My father wanted me to take over eventually," he said, unprompted. "But he didn't want me to lose. He called it my softness." His voice was flat. "I was 23 when I took over. Whatever softness I had, the job finished it." "Sophia said you were braced for impact," Amara said quietly. Sophia was right. "What were you braced for?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant something real was happening behind it. "Everyone leaves or everyone wants something," he said finally. "In my world, those are the only two outcomes. Until someone does neither." He looked at her. She realized what she'd implied and looked at her legal pad. "Your next introduction is Thursday. Her name is Marielle. She's a former appellate judge. She's 52, and she laughs at things she's not supposed to find funny. I think she'll surprise you." He watched her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Amara." She looked up. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Redirecting." He tilted his head slightly. "You do it every time the conversation gets close to something real." The air in the room was very still. "I'm your matchmaker," she said evenly. "Not your match." He said nothing. But the way he didn't say it, the careful, deliberate way he sat with her words and looked at her and chose not to argue, said more than any response would have. She ended the session 10 minutes early. She told herself it was because she had paperwork. Dana didn't note the paperwork the way she'd noted the coffee pot. She just handed Amara her afternoon messages, watched her go into her office, and waited until the door was almost fully closed before she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Oh no." Thursday's introduction with Marielle went better than any of the previous ones, and worse than anything Amara had been prepared for. Marielle Fontaine was everything she'd promised. Sharp, measured, genuinely funny, in the darkest possible way. With 30 years of watching people lie to her face under oath having given her a BS detector that would have been alarming in a less warm person. She and Lucian had argued about sentencing reform for 20 minutes with the mutual enthusiasm of two people who had both formed opinions in rooms where the stakes were actually high. Amara sat in her corner chair and watched the argument and felt, for the first time in this whole process, genuinely, cleanly happy with a match. Marielle caught her eye across the table at one point and smiled, a quick, private smile, one professional woman to another, and mouthed something that looked like good one. Amara smiled back. Then she made the mistake of looking at Lucien at exactly the wrong moment, while he was making a point about mandatory minimums and the way systemic decisions became personal consequences, and his hands had come off the table. He was using them to talk, a thing she had not seen him do before, a thing that meant he had stopped managing his body language and was just inside the conversation. And the light from the window was doing something to his face, and he was, for 4 or 5 unguarded seconds, just a man who found something genuinely interesting and couldn't contain it. And Amara felt what she felt with the specific, awful clarity of a person who has been very carefully not feeling something for long enough that when it finally arrives, it arrives all at once. She looked away immediately. She looked at the tablecloth. She made a note on her pad. She didn't know what the note said. She took a sip of water that she didn't need. By the time she looked back up, Lucien had resumed normal configuration. The moment had passed, but she knew what she'd felt, and she knew she couldn't unfeel it, and she understood, with the professional self-awareness that had built her business and guided 237 people toward their best choices, that she was now standing at the exact edge of a line she could not cross. The drive back from the restaurant was quiet. Lucien had offered her a car. He did this each time, the offer delivered neutrally, as if it were logistics rather than gesture. And this time she had said yes without thinking, a small fracture in her usual no. They were in the back seat when he asked, "What did you think?" "Marielle is exceptional," she said. She kept her voice professional and warm, the voice she used when she was on solid ground. She matched you intellectually, and she didn't try to manage the conversation. She let it be what it was. "Yes." "Did you enjoy it?" "I did." He was looking out the window. The city scrolled past. Lights, movement, the relentless, indifferent energy of New York at 9 in the evening. "I haven't had a real argument with someone in months. In my world, people don't argue with me." "They should." "Yes." He looked at her. "They should." She felt the weight of that look and chose to ignore it. "I'll follow up with her tomorrow," Amara said. "If the interest is mutual, we can arrange a second—" "Amara." She stopped. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, and his voice had dropped into the register it only went to when he was not performing anything. "And I want an honest answer." Her heart was doing the inconvenient thing again. "All right. Is the reason you keep redirecting personal or professional?" The car moved through an intersection. Somewhere, a light changed. The driver was invisible behind the partition, and the partition was the only witness to whatever happened next. Amara looked at Lucien Moretti, at the careful attention in his face, at the patience of a man who had spent 30 days learning to ask questions instead of demanding answers, at the silver threading through his dark hair, and the hands that had finally come off the table long enough to reach toward something real, and she understood that she had arrived somewhere she had told herself she would never go. "Both," she said. The word landed between them like something irreversible. He looked at her. She looked at him. The city kept moving outside the window, enormous and unconcerned, and neither of them said anything else for the rest of the ride. But the silence had changed completely, and they both felt it, and neither of them could take it back. Because some words, once released into the specific air between two specific people at exactly the wrong moment, don't go back. They just stay there and change everything. The words stayed in the car with them all the way to her building. Both. Amara had said it without thinking, which was the problem, because she was a person who always thought before speaking. It was professionally essential, personally protective, and one of the reasons she had lasted 15 years in a business that required her to hold other people's most fragile hopes without breaking them. She did not say things without thinking. She had said that without thinking. The car stopped in front of her building at 9:43. She reached for the door handle with the calm efficiency of a woman who had somewhere to be, which she didn't, but the performance was automatic and she was grateful for it. "Amara." She stopped with her hand on the handle. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear that," Lucien said. "I know." She didn't turn around. "We don't need to discuss it." "You said both." "I said both, and it was an honest answer to an honest question. And tomorrow I'm going to call Marielle and begin the process of arranging a second meeting between the two of you because that is my job and she is an excellent match." She pushed the door open. The night air came in, cold and direct. "Good night, Mr. Moretti." She got out of the car. She walked into her building. She rode the elevator to her floor and let herself into her apartment, and stood in the dark hallway for a long moment before she found the light switch. Her cat, a large and indifferent orange tabby named Gerald, regarded her from the couch with the particular expression cats use when they know something is wrong and are deciding whether to care. "Don't," Amara said. Gerald looked away. She sat down at her kitchen table, still in her coat, and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed. She had done something that 15 years of professional discipline had never allowed her to do. She had let a client see inside the room she kept locked. Not fully, but a crack. A crack was enough. A crack was how buildings came down. She needed to fix this. She opened her laptop and pulled up Marielle Fontaine's contact file, and she wrote an email that was professionally warm and precisely worded, and she scheduled a follow-up call for the next morning. She was thorough and careful, and she crossed every professional T, and when she closed the laptop, her hands were steady. Her chest was not steady, but her hands were, and for the moment, that would have to be sufficient. She did not sleep well. She arrived at the office at 7:15. Dana arrived at 8 and did not note the coffee pot or the early hour or the fact that Amara had rearranged her entire desk overnight, which was a thing she sometimes did when she was thinking about something she didn't want to be thinking about. The desk was now organized with a precision that had no practical basis but felt necessary. "Marielle's call is at 9, Dana said. "I know." "And Mr. Moretti is scheduled for—" "I know." Amara didn't look up. "Push his session to Thursday." Dana's fingers hovered over her keyboard. "It's currently Tuesday." "I know what day it is, Dana." "That's 5 days. That's the new schedule." Silence. The kind Dana deployed when she had something to say that she knew Amara didn't want to hear. "Dana?" "Pushing it to Thursday," Dana said, and typed. The call with Marielle went well. Marielle had enjoyed the dinner. She used the word stimulating with the dry precision of a former judge who had learned to be careful about enthusiasm, and Amara understood that to mean she had been genuinely moved by the evening. She was open to a second meeting. She asked one question. "Is he as complicated as he seems?" And Amara answered honestly. "More," she said. Marielle paused. "Is that a warning?" "It's information. What you do with it is your decision." Another pause. "I appreciate that you don't oversell." "I never oversell." "No," Marielle said. "I don't imagine you do." Amara scheduled the second meeting for the following Tuesday. She wrote it in her calendar in ink, which she always did for confirmed dates, and she looked at it for a moment. Lucien, Marielle, Tuesday, and felt something small and precise move through her chest like a splinter working its way out. Good, she told herself. This was good. This was the job. This was why she was here. She believed this approximately 60%. Julian Hayes walked into her office on Wednesday afternoon without an appointment. He was tall, easy-moving, with the particular warmth of someone who had come through something hard and arrived on the other side of it grateful rather than bitter. He had been one of her clients 4 years ago, a recently divorced architect in his mid-40s who had been so thoroughly convinced that he was unlovable that it had taken 3 months of careful work before he was ready to meet anyone. She had matched him with a woman named Rachel, who was now his wife, and they had a daughter who was 2, and Julian had sent her a birth announcement with a handwritten note that she still had somewhere in her desk. Julian. She came around her desk and hugged him the way you hug someone who used to sit across from you and cry about their ex-wife, and then later sent you a birth announcement, firmly, genuinely. You look good. I feel good. He held her at arm's length and grinned. Rachel's at her sister's with the baby. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd see if you were here. He looked around the office. This place looks exactly the same. Everything works, so nothing changes. Rachel says that. About the kitchen. Drive me crazy. I was still grinning, and he sat down in the chair across from her desk with the ease of someone who had spent a lot of time in that chair, a long time ago, in a different version of himself. How are you? You look tired. I'm fine. Amara. I'm working on a complicated case. Complicated how? She considered how much to say. Difficult client. Good outcome possible, but the path there is requiring more of me than usual. Julian nodded with the understanding of someone who had been a difficult client himself. Is it the work that's complicated or the person? She looked at him for a moment. He had always been perceptive, which was part of why the matching had worked. He asked the right questions. He could hold complexity without needing it to resolve immediately. He had the architectural instinct for seeing structures that weren't immediately visible. Both, she said, and then heard herself say it and felt something cold move through her. That word again. Both. The word she couldn't stop using when she was being more honest than she meant to be. Julian raised his eyebrows slightly. He said nothing. He was good at that, sitting with a thing without filling it. Tell me about the baby, Amara said. Tell me about Rachel. He told her. She listened. He had photographs on his phone, and she looked at them and felt the clean, uncomplicated pleasure of a thing done right. That small face, that sleeping baby, that man who had once sat in this chair convinced he would die alone looking at his daughter like she was the only solid thing in the world. This was why she did the job. This was what it was for. She was still thinking about that, about the clarity of that purpose, when the door opened. She looked up. Lucien Moretti stood in the doorway. I was not supposed to be here. He was pushed to Thursday. His expression registered Julian immediately, registered him in the way that Lucien registered everything, the full second scan, the assessment. And something happened in his face that was quick and small and absolutely unmistakable to anyone who was paying close attention. Amara was always paying close attention. She stood up. Mr. Moretti, your session was rescheduled. I needed to drop something off for Dana. His voice was even. His eyes moved to Julian and then back to her with the deliberate neutrality of a man doing the work of keeping his face controlled. I didn't realize you had a meeting. An old friend stopping by. She kept her voice professional. Julian Hayes, a former client. Julian had stood, the way men do when someone enters a room with that specific quality of authority. He extended his hand. Julian Hayes. Lucien shook it. One pump. Firm. Lucien Moretti. Julian blinked, just barely, the recognition landing behind his eyes without quite reaching his face. He recovered smoothly. Good to meet you. Likewise. Lucien looked at Amara. I'll leave the file with Dana. Thank you. He was gone in 4 seconds. The door closed with the same soft, deliberate click that it always did when he closed it. The click of a man who had learned that controlled exits were more powerful than dramatic ones. Julian sat back down slowly. He looked at the door. He looked at Amara. Lucien Moretti, he said. Yes. The Moretti organization. He's a client. Julian was quiet for a moment, then, Amara. Julian, I just need to ask one question. She looked at him. He was not alarmed the way most people got alarmed about that name. I was the other kind of alarmed. The kind that was about her, not about the name. Are you okay? He asked. She felt it then, fully, the thing she had been managing since Monday night in the back of that car. Not fear. Something more inconvenient than fear. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding a thing at arm's length for long enough that their arms have started shaking. I'm good at my job, she said. That's not what I asked. It's the answer I have. Julian looked at her for a long moment, with the compassion of a man who had been on the receiving end of her care and knew its texture, and said, He's not here to drop off a file. She said nothing. He came here because you pushed the session. Julian's voice was gentle and direct. And someone in his position doesn't show up in person for a rescheduled appointment unless... He stopped. Unless the appointment is an excuse. Amara looked at her desk. At the calendar, at Lucien Mariel, Tuesday, written in ink. He has a second meeting with an excellent match on Tuesday, she said. Marielle Fontaine, former appellate judge. She's smart and funny and completely unimpressed by money, and she argued with him for 20 minutes at dinner like she was presenting a brief and he loved every second of it. She looked up. She's right for him. Julian watched her say all of that. He watched the evenness of it, the professional precision, the way she listed Marielle's qualities like she was reading from a file. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, who are you trying to convince? The answer to that question was still sitting in Amara's chest like an unswallowed thing on Friday morning when she received the phone call that changed the architecture of everything. It came from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Some instinct, the professional habit of always being reachable. Ms. Brooks. The voice was a woman's, middle-aged, careful, with the accent of someone who had grown up in one place and spent decades trying to sand it down without quite succeeding. You don't know me. My name is Renata Voss. I worked in a financial advisory capacity for a firm connected to the Moretti organization. Amara's hand tightened on the phone. Ms. Voss, please don't hang up. A pause, the sound of breathing, slightly unsteady. I'm telling you this because you should know before it goes further. Whatever is happening between you and Lucian Moretti. And I've heard things, you know how these organizations are, things travel. It started differently than you think. The floor of Amara's world shifted, just slightly, just enough to notice. What do you mean, she said carefully, started differently? His mother didn't refer you, Renata Voss said. Vivienne Moretti has very little to do with Lucien's decisions. He found you himself. He had your agency investigated 6 weeks before he ever walked into your office. Staff profiles, client success rates, your background, your methods. A short pause. He chose you specifically. Amara sat very still. He walked in there knowing exactly who you were, Renata continued. The framework, the 40 pages, that was tested with 2 other matchmakers before you. He needed to see how you'd respond to it. He knew you'd turn it down. That was part of it. Part of what? Amara said, and her voice came out flat and controlled and cold, the voice she used when she needed to appear calm, while something inside her was catastrophically not. I don't know the full shape of it, Renata said. I only know what I heard and what I saw in the files when I was still trusted with files. But the 30-day challenge, that wasn't improvised. He had it prepared. He wanted the 30 days. Another pause. He wanted them with you specifically. The phone call ended 2 minutes later. Renata Voss declined to give a callback number. She offered no explanation for why she was telling Amara this, only that she thought someone should. And then the line went dead, and Amara was alone in her office, with her phone in her hand, and the city going about its business 14 floors below her like nothing had happened. She sat at her desk for 11 minutes without moving. Then she called Lucian. He picked up on the second ring. Amara, I need you in my office. Her voice was even, professionally, surgically even. Today? A pause. I can be there at now. Another pause, shorter. An hour. Fine. She hung up before he could say anything else. She spent the hour doing things with her hands, reorganizing files she had already organized, making coffee she didn't drink, rearranging the chairs in her office with the focused energy of a woman who needed to be in motion because being still meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant something she was not prepared to deal with until she had answers. Dana watched all of this from her desk with the expression of a person witnessing a weather event and knowing better than to comment on the wind speed. When the elevator opened and Lucian walked through the door, Amara was standing behind her desk. Not sitting. Standing. He read the room in his usual second. Read her posture, her face, the position of her hands flat on the desk surface. She watched his expression do the small recalibration that happened when he encountered something he hadn't predicted. Shut the door, she said. He shut it. Sit down. He sat slowly, like a man choosing his position carefully. Amara looked at him. She had planned to open with the specific question, the direct accusation, the professional precision that had always served her. What came out instead was this. How long? He was quiet. How long did you have me investigated before you walked into this office? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. 6 weeks, he said. She had known it was coming. Renata Voss had told her. She had spent an hour preparing for this confirmation. It still hit her like a physical thing. Not pain exactly, more like the sudden removal of a floor she hadn't known she was standing on. The 40-page framework, she said. Yes. The challenge. 30 days. Yes. Prepared in advance. Yes. She looked at him. He was looking back with the expression of a man who is not going to insult the situation by pretending, and part of her registered that even now he was not trying to manage it, was not reaching for an explanation or a softening context, was just sitting there in the full weight of being caught. She hated that she registered it. You walked into my office knowing exactly how I'd respond, she said. You manufactured a situation designed to make me believe you were… She stopped, found the right word. Improvising. Yes. Why? Not a question, a demand. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his hands on the arms of the chair, the way he'd looked at them once before when she'd asked about Sophia, the way he looked at things when he was deciding how much truth to spend. Because you were the only person I'd ever read about who told the truth about people, he said. Not what they wanted to hear. Not a performance of insight. Actual truth. He looked up. I wanted to know if you'd tell the truth about me. So you staged it. I created conditions where the truth could happen. That is the same thing. It's not… You lied to me. She said it straight, clean, no texture on it. You sat in that chair and you answered my questions, and you talked about Sophia and architecture and what your father wanted, and all of it, every session, every honest thing, was built on a foundation that you constructed. You chose me before I chose you. You set the terms before I thought we were negotiating. She breathed, steady, in and out. Everything I thought I was seeing clearly, I was seeing through glass you cut. The things I told you were true, he said, and his voice had the low, controlled quality that she now recognized meant he was working hard to keep it level. Every session, every answer, nothing I said to you was performed. Lucienne, I told you about Sophia. I told you about my father and architecture and the fact that I have spent 11 years becoming someone I barely recognize. He leaned forward slightly, the first break in his physical control she'd seen since he sat down. I did not manufacture those things. I manufactured the door. What came through it was real. She stood with that. Stood with it the way you stand with something heavy that you haven't decided yet whether to set down or carry. The door matters, she said finally. I know it does. In my work, in what I do, consent is everything. People come to me and they trust that the process is honest, that I'm not orchestrating them. She looked at him. You orchestrated me. Something moved in his face. Not guilt exactly. Lucien Moretti was not a man to whom guilt came naturally. She had understood that from the first day. Something more complicated. Something closer to the look he had in the car on the way back from the first dinner with Priya when he'd said that everyone leaves or everyone wants something. Yes, he said. I did. And Marielle? What about Marielle? Tuesday, the second meeting. She kept her voice even. Did you agree to it because she's a good match, or because you knew I needed you to? The pause was 2 seconds, 1 second too long. She had her answer. She sat down. Not because she'd decided to, but because something went out of her legs that had been keeping her upright. Something she hadn't even noticed until it was gone. I need you to hear me, she said. Her voice was quiet now. Not cold. Something past cold. I have built this business on one principle. That the people who come to me are not projects. They are not problems I solve. They are human beings who deserve to be met honestly. She looked at him. You came to me and you turned me into a project. That's not… It is. It is what it is, Lucian. And you know it. And I need you to sit with that without explaining it. He sat with it. The clock on her wall counted the silence. 12 seconds. 15. What do you want to do? He said finally. I want to end the arrangement. His jaw tightened. Amara. I want to end it, she said again. And the second time it was quieter and worse, the way the second statement of a true thing is always worse than the first. I want to call Marielle, and I want to give her your number directly, and I want to remove myself from this entirely because I cannot… She stopped. Because I cannot be objective. Because objectivity left the building somewhere around week 2 when you started using your hands to talk. Because I sat across from Marielle Fontaine at a restaurant table and watched you be a full, unguarded human being for 40 seconds, and I felt something I have no right to feel. She didn't say any of that. She said, I cannot be the right person for this anymore. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not calculating, not controlled, not the polished management of a man who ran an empire that required him to be unreadable. Just raw. The word surprised her, but it was the right word. He looked raw, the way people look when something they have spent a long time building has just made a sound it wasn't supposed to make. If you end it, he said, Then I have nothing. No arrangement, no process. He paused. No reason to keep answering questions I've been avoiding for a decade. You don't need me to answer those questions. I know I don't need you. He said it with a precision that was almost painful. That's not the same thing as not wanting you here. The office was very quiet. Amara looked at the calendar on her desk. Lucien, Marielle, Tuesday, written in ink. She picked up her pen. She opened the calendar. She drew a single line through the entry. Not aggressively, not with any drama, just a line, the professional notation for a canceled appointment. And she set the pen down. I'm going to call Marielle today, she said, and I'm going to tell her that I'm stepping back and that she has the option to pursue the connection independently. She looked up. That's what's ethical. And what about what's honest? He said. She stared at him. Ethical and honest are not always the same thing, he said, and she heard her own words from week one coming back through his mouth. The things she had said to him about being accurate versus being honest, and the fact that he had been carrying it all this time was almost more than she could hold. Please go, she said. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Two precise movements that she knew now were not control but habit, the body's muscle memory when the mind was somewhere else entirely. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, not turning around, and he stood there for 4 seconds that felt like they lasted considerably longer. I knew you'd see through the framework, he said, the 40 pages. I knew you'd call it what it was. A pause. I didn't know what you'd do with what you saw underneath. He left. The door made its soft, deliberate click. Amara sat at her desk with the crossed-out calendar entry and the pen she'd had since graduate school and the specific, annihilating clarity of a person who has just done the right thing for reasons that have nothing to do with what they want. Dana appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been standing close enough to hear at least some of what had happened and had the expression of a woman trying to decide if this was a comfort situation or a leave-her-alone situation. Dana, Amara said. Yeah. Get me Marielle Fontaine's number. Dana nodded. She disappeared. She came back 30 seconds later with a post-it and set it on the desk with the gentle care of someone placing something near a person who might shatter. Amara looked at the number. She picked up her phone. She put it back down. She picked it up again, and this time she dialed. And while it rang, she looked out the window at the city that kept going regardless of what happened in any particular office on any particular floor. The city that had no opinion about any of this. The city that had watched 1,000 people do exactly what she was doing right now, making the correct choice and feeling Marielle picked up on the third ring. Amara. Her voice was warm, slightly surprised. I wasn't expecting to hear from you until next week. I know. I'm sorry to call without notice. Amara kept her voice level. Professional. The voice that had carried her through 237 difficult conversations. I'm calling about the Tuesday meeting. A pause. The kind that meant Marielle was already reading something in the tone. Former judges developed that reflex, the ability to hear what wasn't being said as clearly as what was. What about it? Marielle said. I need to step back from this particular arrangement. Amara looked at the crossed-out calendar entry. It's an ethical conflict that I should have identified earlier. I want to be transparent with you about that rather than offering a softer explanation. Silence on the line. 3 full seconds. You fell for him, Marielle said. Amara closed her eyes, opened them. I developed a conflict of interest that compromises my ability to advocate for you objectively. That's the professional framing. And the human framing is what it is. Marielle made a sound that was not quite a laugh, not unkind, more like the sound a person makes when they recognize something they've already seen coming. He talked about you, she said, at the dinner, not directly. He's too controlled for that. But the way he answered certain questions, the way he'd pause before responding like he was thinking about how you would have asked it differently. A pause. I noticed. Amara said nothing. I'm not angry, Marielle said. I want you to know that. I had a good evening. I met an interesting man. Whatever this becomes without you in the middle of it, I'm a grown woman and I can navigate it. Her voice shifted slightly. But Amara, don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of professional protocol when what you're actually doing is running away. The call ended 4 minutes later with Marielle's number passed along, and the arrangement formally closed, and the clean, procedural correctness of everything Amara had just done sitting in her chest like a stone she'd swallowed. She had done the right thing. The stone didn't care. She was putting her phone down when Dana knocked once and pushed the door open with the expression she used when something had happened that required immediate attention, regardless of context or timing. "There's a woman here," Dana said. "She doesn't have an appointment. She says her name is Celeste Beaumont, and she says she's here about Lucien Moretti." Amara looked up. "I don't know that name." "She says you will soon." Dana paused. "She's... Amara, she's something." Celeste Beaumont was, in fact, something. She was perhaps 45, with the kind of bone structure that photographs could not fully capture, and the kind of stillness that had nothing to do with passivity. She was dressed simply. Dark slacks, a cream blouse, a single watch that was expensive in the way that things are expensive when they're bought for quality rather than display. She sat in the waiting area chair without performing patience, which meant she actually had it. She stood when Amara came out and offered her hand, and her grip was firm and honest. "I know I don't have an appointment," she said. "I'll be brief." "Come in," Amara said. She sat across the desk with the same quality that Marielle had. The composure of a woman who had spent years in rooms where composure was the price of being taken seriously. But where Marielle's composure had an edge of dry wit underneath it, Celeste's had something quieter, steadier. The composure of someone who had survived something and come out the other side without needing to announce it. "How do you know Lucien Moretti?" Amara said. "I don't. Not yet." Celeste folded her hands in her lap. "Vivian Moretti called me this morning. We've known each other for years. She was a close friend of my mother's. She told me about the arrangement. She told me it was ending." She looked at Amara directly. She asked if I'd be willing to meet him. Amara felt the geometry of the situation rearrange itself. "Vivian contacted you directly," she said. "Yes." "Without going through my agency?" "Yes." Celeste's voice was even. She wasn't apologizing for it. "I wanted to come here first. I thought it was right to tell you rather than proceed without your knowledge, since you're involved." "I'm no longer involved," Amara said. "I've stepped back from the arrangement." "I know. Vivian told me." Celeste looked at her for a moment with eyes that were doing what Marielle's had done, reading the space between the words. "She also told me why." Amara held very still. "I'm not here to make this harder," Celeste said. "I'm here because I'm 45 years old, and I have built a life I'm proud of, and I'm tired of being alone in it, and Vivian described her son in a way that made me think he might understand what that is." She paused. "I'm also here because I wanted to look at you." "Excuse me?" "Vivian said you were exceptional. I wanted to see if she was right." A pause. "She is." Amara looked at this woman and felt something complicated and unwanted move through her. Not hostility. Nothing as simple as that. Something more like the sensation of watching someone walk through a door you've just closed and understanding that the door wasn't as closed as you thought. "Miss Beaumont," she said carefully, "I'm not in a position to facilitate any new arrangement with Mr. Moretti. As I mentioned, I'm not asking you to facilitate anything." Celeste's voice was gentle but clear. "I'm asking you to be honest with me about one thing." Amara waited. "Is he worth it?" Celeste said. "Not the name, not what he runs, him, the person. Is he worth the difficulty of him?" The office was very quiet. Amara thought about the 40-page portfolio and the 6 weeks of investigation and the manufactured 30-day challenge. She thought about both said in the back of a car. She thought about his hands finally leaving the table during an argument about sentencing reform, moving through the air like he'd forgotten he was supposed to be controlled. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was constitutionally unable to leave a true thing only partially true, which is the problem. Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Not pity, not triumph, just recognition. The look of a woman who understands a situation completely and has decided what to do with that understanding. "Thank you," she said. She stood. She smoothed her slacks with one hand, a single clean gesture. "I'll reach out to Vivian." She left. Amara sat at her desk until she heard the elevator open and close. Then she put her head in her hands. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way people do when they need 30 seconds to be a person before they have to be professional again. Dana, she said, loud enough to carry. A pause. Then Dana's voice, careful. Yeah. Go to lunch. It's 10:45. Early lunch. A longer pause. Amara. Please. She heard Dana's chair, her bag, the sound of the office door, then silence, full and complete, the rare silence of a New York office with nobody in it, and Amara sat in it and breathed and tried to locate the solid ground that had always been under her feet before and could not find it. Her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number. She thought about Renata Voss and picked up. It was not Renata Voss. Ms. Brooks, a man's voice, flat, businesslike, with an accent she couldn't immediately place. I'm calling on behalf of certain parties who have a shared interest in the Moretti arrangement concluding. Her hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand the situation clearly. A pause. You've ended the arrangement. That's good. We'd like you to ensure it stays ended. The cold that moved through her now was different from any cold she'd felt in this office before. This was not the cold of professional disappointment or complicated emotion. This was the cold of understanding that she had been operating inside a set of circumstances much larger than what she could see. I've already ended it, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. We know. We'd like your assurance that you won't resume contact with Moretti in any personal capacity. His attention needs to be elsewhere. A distraction at this particular moment in his organization's affairs could have consequences that go beyond your personal situation. Another pause. We'd hate for that to affect your business. You've built something impressive. The line went dead. Amara set the phone down on her desk. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up, put on her coat, picked up her bag, and walked out of the office. She needed to move. She needed the city under her feet and the cold air and the noise, the particular noise of New York that had the quality of being both oppressive and grounding. The city that had no opinion about any individual crisis but provided the reliable comfort of scale. Your problem is real, the city said, and also there are 9 million other problems happening simultaneously, so. She walked south. She didn't know where she was going, and she didn't particularly care. She went 4 blocks, 6 blocks, the cold working its way through her coat in a way she found clarifying. She was thinking about the phone call, about the voice, flat, businesslike, the particular cadence of someone delivering a message they hadn't authored. A messenger. Someone had sent a messenger. Someone in Lucien's world, or adjacent to it, or opposing it, had been watching the arrangement closely enough to know it had ended this morning, had responded within hours, had known her phone number and had called with the specific language of a threat that maintains plausible deniability. Consequences that go beyond your personal situation, we'd hate for that to affect your business. Her business. The business she had spent 15 years building, alone, without family money or institutional backing, without anyone's permission or assistance. 237 people, a 12-month waiting list. The thing her mother had ordered champagne for. She stopped walking. She was standing on a corner somewhere in the 20s, with cabs going past and 2 people arguing over a parking space, and a woman walking a dog who was absolutely not supposed to be on this sidewalk based on the sign directly behind her. The ordinary, grinding, mechanical life of the city, indifferent and continuous. Someone had threatened her business, not Lucien. She was certain of that with the bone certainty she trusted above everything else. Lucien had manufactured the beginning and had been honest about everything that followed, and she could hold both of those things simultaneously and still know that a direct threat to her livelihood was not in his vocabulary. His vocabulary ran more toward showing up alone without a security detail. Someone else. Someone who wanted Lucien's attention on something she didn't have full visibility into. Someone who had identified her as a variable. She had been made a variable. She turned around and walked back to her building. She did not go to her office. She went to the lobby, found a corner chair that was partially shielded from the main entrance, and she called the one person she had whose number she shouldn't really have had but did, because 2 years ago he had slipped it to her at a charity event and said, "If you're ever working with someone whose situation gets complicated, I'm a resource." And she had put it in her phone under R. Complicated situations, and never expected to use it. Detective Ray Okonkwo picked up on the first ring. "Ms. Brooks." His voice was warm and alert. He was the kind of man who sounded fully awake at all hours, which probably had something to do with his job. I received a threatening phone call this morning, she said. No name given. Implied threat to my business if I maintained contact with a specific individual. She paused. The individual is Lucien Moretti. A silence. The kind that meant he was recalibrating. Are you safe? He said. Yes. Where are you now? My building lobby. Stay there. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. A pause. Don't call Moretti. The line went dead. She sat in the lobby chair for 8 minutes before her phone rang again. Okay, Ray said, and his voice was different now, tighter, more careful. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not react in a way that draws attention to yourself. I'm sitting in a lobby, she said. Good. There's a situation developing in the Moretti organization. I can't tell you specifics, but what I can tell you is that the threat you received is consistent with activity we've been tracking for several months. He paused. The people who called you are not Moretti's people. I know they're not. They're a competing organization, and right now their interest is in making sure Moretti is distracted, destabilized, anything that keeps him from having the full focus he needs. Ray's voice dropped slightly. That means anyone close to him is a potential point of pressure. Amara breathed, in and out. Close to him, she said. I'm not close to him. I was his matchmaker and I terminated the arrangement this morning. They don't appear to know the distinction, Ray said, or care about it. The lobby went on around her, people coming and going, the doorman nodding at residents, a delivery person with a cart. The ordinary life of a building that had no idea any of this was happening. What do I do? She said. Honestly, you go about your business and you don't contact Moretti and you let this resolve on its own. A pause. Or you call him, you tell him what happened, you let him handle it. Ray was quiet for a moment. He will handle it, Ms. Brooks. That part I can tell you with confidence. She didn't say anything. The choice is yours, Ray said. But make it quickly. These situations have a tendency to accelerate. She called Lucien 17 minutes later. He picked up before the first ring finished, like he'd been holding the phone. Amara. I need to see you. She kept her voice level. Someone called me. A threat. Your name was mentioned. The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Where are you? My building lobby. Don't move. His voice had changed. Not loud, not rover, just compressed. Like something had been stripped away, and what was underneath was something much older and much more certain. I'll be there in 12 minutes. He was there in 9. He came through the lobby door and she saw immediately that he was different. Not different from the man in her office or the man in the restaurant. Different from the version of himself he had been allowing her to see. The control was still there, but it was no longer performing ease. It was purely functional now, the control of a man who has shifted fully into a mode that his daily life required him to keep largely invisible. He sat down next to her, not across from her, and he was close enough that she could feel the cold that had come in with him from outside still sitting in his jacket. Tell me exactly what they said, he said, word for word. She told him. She was precise. She had a professional's memory for exact language. It was an occupational requirement, and she reproduced the call as closely as she could while he listened with the still, total attention of someone building something in real time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Renata Voss called you, he said. Not a question. She looked at him. You knew. I knew she was talking. I didn't know to whom. His jaw was tight. She's been feeding information to a competing organization for approximately 4 months. We identified it last week. And you didn't warn me. I didn't know you were in their sightline. His voice was flat, factual, and underneath the flatness something that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it. The specific fury of a controlled man encountering something he didn't anticipate. That changes now. Lucien, you're not safe while they think you're relevant to me. He looked at her directly, the full weight of his attention, and it was different from any way he had looked at her before because the calculation was gone. This was just a man looking at a woman who was in danger because of him. I need to move you. You need to... She stopped. I'm not going anywhere. I have a business. I have clients. I know what you have. His voice was low and controlled and left no room in it. I also know what these people do when they decide someone is useful as leverage. You become a conversation I don't want to have. He breathed once, through his nose. I'm not letting you be a conversation. This is not your decision. You called me. I called you because I needed information, not permission. He looked at her for a moment, and in that moment she saw something that she had only seen once before. When she'd told him he wasn't ready for a relationship, and the entire room had frozen, and he'd sat in it without reaching for control. The same quality now. The stripped-back quality of a man who has nothing left to manage with except the truth. I know, he said. You don't need my permission. You never have. That is... He stopped. His hands, resting on his knees, closed once and opened. That is not the point. Then what is the point? The point is that I brought this to your door. Whatever I did to get you into this arrangement, however I engineered the beginning of it, I did not engineer this. I did not want this for you. And I need you to know that whatever you think of me right now, whatever you've decided about who I am and what I'm capable of, I will not let anything happen to you. The lobby was loud around them. Someone dropped something metallic near the elevator bank. The doorman's radio crackled. A woman in red walked past talking on her phone with the urgency of a minor crisis. Vivian called Celeste Beaumont this morning, Amar said. He blinked. The subject change caught him genuinely off guard, which was becoming her most reliable method of accessing the real Lucien Moretti, the one who existed under the 11 years of operational armor. My mother... He stopped. Something moved across his face. When? This morning, Celeste came to my office. Lucien, she is extraordinary. She's everything I would have found for you if I'd had more time. She held his gaze. Your mother isn't wrong. He was very still. You ended the arrangement, he said finally. Yes. And now you're telling me about Celeste Beaumont. I'm doing my job. You resigned from my case. I'm doing my job, she said again, and her voice cracked on the last word, barely, the smallest fracture, enough that she felt it and knew he heard it and couldn't take it back. They sat with that in the lobby of her building, with the city's noise working through the glass and the doorman's radio going, and the specific quality of a shared silence that has too much in it to be comfortable and too much truth in it to be broken easily. I don't want Celeste Beaumont, Lucien said. His voice was very quiet, precisely, absolutely quiet. I want you to stop doing that. Lucien, I want you to stop finding me other women. He looked at her. I spent 30 days answering every question you asked me. I told you things I have not said to any person in 11 years. I walked into your office without my security detail, and I sat in that chair, and I was more honest with you than I have been with anyone since before my father died. His voice remained quiet, and it was the quietness that made it unbearable. And I know what I did at the beginning. I know the beginning was manufactured. I have no defense for that except that the rest of it wasn't, and I think you know the rest of it wasn't. And I think the reason you keep finding me other women is not because you believe they're better for me. I think it's because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. Her chest was doing something she had very limited ability to manage. I have a conflict of interest, she said. You have feelings, he said. Those are different things. In my profession? I'm not talking about your profession right now. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped further, and there was nothing managed about it anymore. I'm talking about you and me in this lobby. I'm talking about the fact that someone threatened you this morning because of me and my first thought. My first thought, before logistics, before protocol, before anything operational, was that you were scared and I needed to be where you were. He stopped. That is not the thought of a man who wants Celeste Beaumont. The lobby doors opened. A cold draft came through. Neither of them moved. Amara looked at this man, at the careful, armored, infuriating, occasionally breathtaking complexity of him, and felt the 30 days compact themselves into a single, pressurized thing in her chest. Every question she had asked him, every answer he had given more honestly than she'd expected, the hands leaving the table, both in the back of the car. You lied to me, she said, about the beginning. Yes, that matters. I know it does. It's not a small thing. I know that too. He didn't flinch from it. I'm not asking you to act like it's small. I'm asking you to put it next to everything else and tell me what the whole picture looks like. She breathed. The lobby moved around them, indifferent and continuous. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Rayo Conquo. Situation escalating on our end. If Moretti is with you, stay with him. Don't be alone tonight. She showed Lucien the message without speaking. He read it. His face did the compression thing again. The stripping back. We need to move, he said. Where? He looked at her. Somewhere I can keep you safe while I deal with this. And after you deal with it? He understood what she was asking. The after. The question of what existed on the other side of tonight when the immediate danger was handled, and they were left with just themselves and the complicated, manufactured, unexpectedly true 30 days between them. After, he said carefully, we have an honest conversation. Whatever you decide it without a gun at your back. He stood, reached a hand down to her, not taking her arm, not directing her, just offering, leaving it to her. Come on. She looked at his hand. She thought about the 40-page portfolio. She thought about Renata Voss's voice and the threatening call in Rayo Conquo's text. She thought about Celeste Beaumont's question, is he worth the difficulty of him? And her own answer. She thought about her mother ordering champagne for a decision that terrified her and trusting her anyway. She took his hand. They walked out of the lobby together into the cold and the noise and the enormous, indifferent city. And behind them, the doorman watched them go with the neutral expression of a man who had seen everything and commented on nothing, and the lobby door swung shut behind them with a sound like something closing. And somewhere in the organization that opposed the Moretti name, a phone rang with news of a development that no one had. The car that was waiting for them outside her building was not the same car as before. It was darker, lower, and the man who held the door was not a driver in the conventional sense. He held himself differently, scanned the street before either of them stepped fully off the curb, and his jacket sat wrong in the specific way that meant something underneath it. Lucien spoke to him in a voice too low for Amara to hear, and the man nodded once, and they were moving within 30 seconds of leaving the lobby. Amara sat in the back seat and kept her hands folded in her lap and watched the city scroll past and did not ask where they were going. She would ask in a moment. She needed the moment first. Lucien was on his phone. He had been on it since they hit the sidewalk, speaking in the clipped, abbreviated language of a man issuing instructions that required no elaboration because the people receiving them already understood the full architecture of what was needed. He was not speaking Italian, which surprised her somehow. Just English, stripped to its functional bones. Names she didn't recognize. Streets. Times. A number that meant nothing to her, but clearly meant something significant to whoever was on the other end because the response she could faintly hear through the phone shifted register entirely. He hung up, put the phone in his jacket pocket, looked at her. We're going to a building in Tribeca, he said. It's secure. You'll have your own space, and you'll have full communication. Phone, laptop, everything. You're not a prisoner. I know I'm not, she said. I need you to know that out loud. Lucien. She looked at him. I got in the car. I know what I did. He held her gaze for a moment, and something in his face loosened very slightly, the way a fist opens when the immediate emergency passes and the body remembers it, knows how to do other things. Renata Voss is not the problem, he said. She was a conduit. The people who called you, they've been building pressure on several fronts for about 6 months. Tonight is... There are things in motion that were already in motion before any of this. Your situation accelerated their timeline. My situation, she said. You. He said it simply. My association with you. They identified it as a vulnerability. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They weren't wrong that it's a vulnerability. They were wrong about what I'd do with it. She thought about that. About what it meant. That she had been identified as a vulnerability by people who understood Lucien Moretti's patterns well enough to know that she was something different. Something that didn't fit the established model of his life and therefore represented an opening. What do you do with it? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. I protect it, he said. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like it was the thing he'd always done, redirected now towards something that mattered in a way his empire never had. The building in Tribeca was a converted warehouse with a lobby that was spare and clean and had the particular silence of a place where the soundproofing was serious. The man from the car, whose name, she learned, was Thomas, stayed downstairs. Lucien took her up in an elevator that required a key and opened into a floor that was a single large space, not ostentatious but not modest either. High ceilings. Good light even at this hour, the kind of thoughtfully placed artificial light that understood how natural light worked and tried to approximate it. There was a kitchen, a sitting area, two closed doors that presumably led to other rooms. On the kitchen counter, coffee, a full refrigerator visible through the glass front, the basics. Someone stocked this, she said. Thomas called ahead. How many places like this do you have? A few. He set his keys on the counter. New York, two others. She looked around. She was doing the professional thing she always did in new spaces, reading what they said about the person who occupied them. This one said, functional, private, impermanent, no photographs, nothing decorative that wasn't also structural, a place designed for staying in rather than living in. You've spent a lot of time in places that feel like this, she said. He looked around the space, seeing it through her observation. Yes. Does it bother you? A pause. It didn't used to. She set her bag down on the kitchen counter and took off her coat and looked at him with the clear, direct look that she had used throughout their 30 days together. The look that didn't let people manage the distance between what they showed and what they felt. Tell me what's happening tonight, she said. Not the operational details. Tell me what you're walking into. Amara, you said we'd have an honest conversation after. I'm moving it up. He looked at her for a moment, then he took off his jacket and set it over a chair, the first time she had ever seen him do something so ordinary and unguarded, and he stood in his shirt sleeves in the kitchen of a safe house and said, There's a man named Carver. He runs a competing organization out of Philadelphia. He's been consolidating for the past year and a half, and the consolidation required him to make promises to certain parties that he can only keep by reducing the Moretti organization's presence in specific markets. He paused. He's been trying to create a moment where I'm distracted or compromised enough that the consolidation can happen without direct confrontation. And the call to me was part of creating that moment. It was an escalation. He expected me to either disengage from you to protect you, which would have demonstrated that you were a pressure point he could use again, or respond disproportionately, which would have created the kind of exposure that makes organizations vulnerable. Lucien looked at her steadily. He didn't anticipate that I'd move you and deal with him simultaneously. Can you, she said, deal with him? Yes. How? He was quiet. I'm not asking for details, she said. I'm asking if you come back from it. He understood what she meant. She could see him understand it, the specific fear, not for his physical safety in the straightforward sense, but for the version of him that had spent 30 days learning to put his hands on the table and answer honest questions. The version that had let something in. She was asking whether what she'd watched open would survive whatever tonight required it to do. I come back, he said. Whatever I have to do tonight, I've done harder things and remained recognizable to myself. A pause. The difference is that before there was no one I needed to remain recognizable to. She felt that in the specific place in her chest that had been feeling things she hadn't planned to feel for 6 weeks. Go, she said. Handle it. Come back. He picked up his jacket. He was buttoning it, the two precise movements, when she crossed the kitchen and put her hand on his arm and he stopped. She had never initiated contact. In 30 days and every charged, complicated exchange between them, she had always held the professional distance, maintained the boundary, kept herself on the correct side of the line. She kept her hand on his arm and looked up at him and said, I need you to know something before you go. He waited. What you did at the beginning, the investigation, the framework, the manufactured challenge, I'm not done being angry about it. I want you to know that clearly. She held his gaze. I'm also not done with you. Those two things are both true at the same time, and I need them both to be said out loud before you walk out that door. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Okay, he said, quietly. Just that. She let go. He left. She heard the elevator, then nothing. She stood in the kitchen of a safe house in Tribeca at 7:40 in the evening and listened to the silence and felt the specific, gritty, unglamorous texture of waiting for someone to come back from something you have no control over. It was not a feeling she had much experience with. She was a woman who controlled the controllable and made peace with the rest. And this was neither. She made coffee because her hands needed something to do. She called Dana and told her she would be out of the office until further notice and told her to reschedule the week's sessions and gave no explanation. And Dana, who had learned to read the temperature of situations in Amara's voice the way she read it in the morning office, asked only one question. "Are you safe?" "Yes," Amara said. "Okay," Dana said, exactly as Lucian had said it. The same word, the same quality. "I don't have any more questions right now. That answer is enough." She called her sister in Philadelphia and talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Her sister's job, her nephew's school play, the kitchen renovation that had been ongoing for 8 months and had become a family joke. She talked and listened and laughed in the right places and felt, through the whole conversation, the grounding weight of ordinary life happening alongside the extraordinary, the reminder that both things were always true simultaneously, that the world was always both the safe house in Tribeca and her nephew's school play, and you lived in both or you lived in neither. After she hung up, she sat on the couch and looked at the high ceiling and thought about Celeste Beaumont. She thought about her specifically, clearly, without flinching. Celeste was real. Celeste was extraordinary. Celeste had walked into Amara's office that morning with the composure of a woman who knew her own worth and had asked one honest question and received one honest answer and handled the whole thing with more grace than the situation deserved. If Amara were advising herself, if she could somehow be her own client, sit across the desk from herself and answer the intake questions with complete honesty, she would have identified the conflict of interest 6 weeks ago and recused herself and matched Lucien Moretti with Celeste Beaumont. And it would have been, professionally, a success. She thought about what success had looked like in those terms, and felt absolutely nothing that resembled wanting it. That was the truth of it, plain and unglamorous. She was 41 years old, and she had built something real, and she had never once mistaken competency for happiness, professional success for a full life. And she was sitting in a safe house waiting for a mafia boss who had lied to her about the terms of their arrangement and told her more truth than anyone had in years. And she was not confused about what she wanted. She was terrified of it. Those were different things. She fell asleep on the couch sometime after midnight. She woke up to the sound of the elevator. The clock on the microwave said 3:47. The safe house was still and dim, one light left on in the kitchen. She sat up and her neck protested the couch angle, and she was fully awake by the time the elevator opened and Lucien walked in. He was still wearing the same clothes. His jacket was in his hand rather than on his body. He looked not physically damaged, no visible injury, but used. The way people look when they have spent several hours operating at the outermost edge of what they're capable of and have come back from it with everything intact and nothing easy. He stopped when he saw her awake. He stood in the entrance of the living area and looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Carver," she said. "Handled." His voice was low and rough at the edges. No more phone calls to matchmakers. "Anyone hurt?" A pause that told her the answer without words. "Anyone who didn't make choices that led them to that room," he said. She accepted that. She had known what he was when she got in the car. She had known what she was accepting proximity to, not abstractly but concretely, and she had gotten in the car anyway, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. "Renata Voss," she said. "She's talking to people who are better suited to handle what she knows than I am." He set his jacket over the chair that already held yesterday's version of it. "She made choices. She'll deal with their consequences through channels that won't require my involvement." Amara nodded. He went to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water and drank most of it standing at the counter, and she watched his throat move and his shoulders, which had been at a particular elevation since she'd met him, drop by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. Not relaxed, but less braced. "You should sleep," she said. "I know." He set the glass down, looked at her across the kitchen counter. "I want to say something first. Lucienne, Amara." He said her name the way he'd said it in week 1, testing the weight of it, except now he'd been carrying it long enough that the weight was familiar. "I owe you a full account of the beginning, not an explanation, an account. You deserve to know the whole shape of it." She looked at him. At 3:47 in the morning in a safe house kitchen, this man who had spent the night doing things she would never fully know the details of, standing in his shirt sleeves with his jacket over a chair and a water glass on the counter, choosing this as the moment for honesty. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." He told her. He had read about her in the Harvard Business School study, the one that had analyzed her compatibility methodology. He had been, his word, and he said it with the self-awareness of someone who has had time to examine an impulse and identify its source. Lonely. in the specific, sealed way of people who are surrounded by dependents and subordinates and family members, and never once encountered a person who had no stake in what they wanted from him. He had read about a woman who told people true things about themselves when the true things were inconvenient, and something in him, something he described quietly as the last living part of the person his father had hoped he'd be, had fixated on that. He had investigated her because investigating was the only way he knew to approach something he wanted. He had tested the framework with 2 other matchmakers as a rehearsal because he needed to know what her specific response would be before he walked in. He had prepared the 30-day challenge because he knew she would never agree to something that felt like surrender. She'd only accept what felt like a professional bet. "I engineered a situation," he said, "in which you could discover me honestly, which is—" He stopped, looked at the counter. "Which is the most dishonest possible way to arrive at honesty." She sat with that. "Yes," she said. "It is." "I know." He looked up. "And I know that telling you my reasons doesn't fix it. I'm not telling you my reasons because I think they fix it. I'm telling you because you deserve the complete picture, and I am done. I am genuinely done, withholding things from you because I'm afraid of how you'll use them." The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you afraid I'll do with it?" she said. "Leave." The word came out clean and undefended. No armor around it. "Decide that the dishonesty of the beginning is the truest thing about me and leave." She looked at him for a long time. At the water glass and the jacket on the chair, and the man who had sat in her office and answered questions he'd been avoiding for a decade, who had put his hands on the table and used them to talk about something he loved, who had shown up in her lobby at 9 minutes instead of 12, and said, "You're not a prisoner," and meant both the literal and the other thing underneath it. "Lucien," she said, "what did you want to be an architect for?" He blinked. The subject change caught him, as it always did. "Because," he said slowly, "buildings exist for the people inside them. You design from the inside out. You start with how a person will stand in a room where the light will fall on them, what they'll see when they look up, and then you build everything else around that." He paused. "I like the idea of making spaces that held people well." "You like the idea of making spaces that held people well," she repeated. He heard himself. She watched him hear himself. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did. You've spent 11 years making the opposite kind of spaces." "Yes." "And then you walked into mine." He was very still. "You walked into my space," she said, "which I built from the inside out, which I designed around the question of what people need in order to be held without being contained, and you—" She stopped. She had not planned this. She had not planned any of what came out of her mouth next, which meant it was the truest version of it. "You sat in my chair, and you answered every question, and you got better at it every single time, and I watched it happen, and I could not— I tried very hard. I could not remain a professional observer." He crossed the kitchen. Not quickly, deliberately, with the specific deliberateness of a man who had learned, somewhere in the last 30 days, to move toward things instead of strategizing around them. He stopped on the other side of the counter and looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said, "about the beginning. I'm not sorry about any of the rest of it, but the beginning, I'm sorry." "I know you are. That's not the same as it being enough." "No," she agreed. "It's not enough. It's also not nothing." She held his gaze. "I've spent 15 years asking people to sit with the complicated truth of other people, to hold imperfection and choose anyway, not blindly, not without clear eyes, but choose. Because the alternative is waiting for a version of a person that doesn't exist." She breathed. "I'm not going to ask you to be something you're not. I'm also not going to pretend the beginning doesn't matter." "What does that mean?" he said carefully. "It means we start from here. Not from the beginning, from here. Tonight. This conversation." She looked at him steadily. "It means I need you to understand that I am not a variable in your organization's affairs. I am not leverage. I am not a soft point that your enemies can press." Her voice was even, and it was also immovable. "I am a person who built something real, and I will not be managed or protected into smallness. Not by Carver, not by the people who called my phone, and not by you." "I know that," he said. "I need you to know it when it's inconvenient," she said. "Not just right now." "Amara, He said her name with the weight of all 30 days behind it. The woman who told me I wasn't emotionally ready for a relationship in the first 40 minutes I knew her. I am not under any illusions about your willingness to remain small for anyone's comfort, including mine. A pause. Especially mine. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not entirely. Not all at once. Just the first movement of a thing that had been held very tightly beginning to breathe. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They stood on opposite sides of the counter. I have a couch that's done permanent damage to my neck, she said. There are 2 bedrooms. I know there are 2 bedrooms. I'm going to take a shower, he said, and then I'm going to sleep for several hours. And when I wake up, he stopped. When you wake up, she said, I'd like to take you to breakfast. He said it carefully. Not as Lucian Moretti, whose name changed the pressure in a room. Just as a man who had had a long night and wanted, in the morning, to sit across a table from a specific woman with coffee and the ordinary light of a new day. Not as a client, not as an arrangement, just breakfast. She looked at him. I like breakfast, she said. He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile from the first day, the one that arrived when he encountered something he didn't have a category for. Except this time it made it further, got closer to the real thing, the one she suspected his face remembered how to do, even if it had forgotten the habit. He went down the hall. She heard the shower. She went to the second bedroom and lay down on a bed that was better than the couch by every measurable standard. And she stared at the ceiling and listened to the building's silence and felt the specific, unsettled, wide-awake quality of a person whose life has just moved irrevocably into a new configuration. She thought about her mother, about champagne ordered for a terrifying decision, about you've always known things other people take years to figure out. She thought about Marielle Fontaine, who had said, don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of professional protocol when what you're actually doing is running away. She thought about Dana, who had watched the whole 30 days from her desk outside and had noted the coffee pot and said, oh no, to an empty room and never once told Amara what to do. She thought about 237 people who had sat across her desk and trusted her with the most fragile, necessary parts of themselves. The hope that another person existed who could know them honestly and choose them anyway. She had told every one of them the same thing. Compatibility is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of 2 people who are willing to stay in the room when difficulty arrives. She had believed it when she said it. She had known it was true in the abstract, professional, evidential way. She had watched it play out across dozens of relationships she had helped build, but she had said it from the outside. She had said it as someone who understood the principle without having been asked to live it. The ceiling of the bedroom in the safe house in Tribeca was white and plain and said nothing. She was being asked to live it now. In the morning, she woke before him. She found the kitchen and the coffee and she made a pot. A full pot, both cups, and she stood at the window that looked out over the street below, the early morning street, the delivery trucks, and the first runners, and the particular quality of New York light at 6:30 when the city is shifting from night configuration to day and everything is briefly in between. She heard him in the hallway behind her before she heard his footsteps. Some awareness she had developed over 30 days of paying close attention to the way he moved through spaces. He came to stand beside her at the window. He had slept in a clean shirt, his hair slightly displaced from its usual precision. He looked human was the word. Just human. Not the man the room changed for. Just a person standing at a window in the early morning looking at a city that had no opinion about him. She handed him a cup. He took it. They stood at the window and drank their coffee and watched the street move below them, and neither of them said anything for a long time, and the silence was the good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling because something in it is already full. I need to go back to my office today, she said eventually. I know. I have clients, real work, people who are waiting for me to do the job I'm actually good at. I know that too. And you have, she paused, whatever comes after last night. There are things to handle, he said. Yes. So this is breakfast. He looked at her. This is breakfast. She looked back at him. The morning light was doing something to his face that she would remember later, the way certain moments get stored with unusual completeness. The angle, the light, the feeling of the coffee cup in her hand, the sound of a truck downstairs. Here's what I know, she said. I know that you engineered the beginning, and I'm not over it. I know that everything that came after was real, including the parts that were inconvenient for both of us. I know that you're complicated in ways that will require things from me that I haven't fully calculated yet. She held his gaze. And I know that I am a plus-size black woman who built something real from nothing and does not require rescuing or containing or managing, and I have zero interest in becoming smaller to fit into any world, including yours. I know all of that, he said. Then tell me what you're actually offering, she said. Not a gesture, not a promise of luxury. Tell me what you're actually offering. He looked at his coffee cup, then out the window, then at her, with the directness of a man who has spent 30 days being asked to stop performing and start telling the truth, and has, somewhere in that process, actually learned how. I'm offering to be someone worth the difficulty, he said. Not immediately, probably not without failures, but he stopped, restarted. I spent my whole adult life building things that could last, systems, structures, things that held their shape under pressure. He looked at her. I never tried to build anything that mattered. I think I want to try. She thought about architecture, about designing from the inside out, about starting with how a person would stand in a room and building everything else around that. That's not nothing, she said. No, he agreed. It's not nothing. She looked out the window at the morning, at the delivery trucks and the runners, and the city assembling itself into another day, indifferent and continuous, and somehow, always, enough. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again. We try. He did not reach for her hand. He did not make a declaration. He stood at the window beside her with his coffee and the morning light, and nodded once, with the careful gravity of a man who understands that some agreements are too important to be treated as moments. They were treated as beginnings. Later, months later, in the way that later always arrives, incrementally and then completely, people who knew Amara Brooks would say that she seemed different. Not softer, not harder, just more fully herself, somehow, the way people get when they stop managing the distance between who they are and what they want. She still owned and operated her agency. She still had a waiting list. She still sat across her desk from people carrying hope, like something fragile, and helped them understand that fragile was not the same as breakable. She and Dana never directly discussed the 30 days. Dana simply noted one morning about 6 weeks after the Tribeca night that there was now only one coffee cup made in the mornings, because Amara had started arriving later, and Dana filed that information in the same internal archive where she kept the note about the pot and the early hours and the rearranged desk, and she said nothing about any of it. Lucien came to the office once, in those later months, not as a client, not announced. He came in on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in the waiting area chair and looked at the space the way he'd looked at everything in the beginning, that full second of assessment, except this time what he was assessing was not exits or variables or tactical considerations. I was looking at the place she had built and the way it worked and the people who moved through it carefully carrying their hopes, and his face, while he sat there waiting for her to finish with a client, held the open quality she had only ever seen in him for 4 or 5 unguarded seconds during an argument about sentencing reform. She came out and saw him and stopped in the doorway of her office. He stood. He was holding a paper bag that turned out to contain lunch, not expensive, not a gesture, just sandwiches from the place on the corner because he'd walked past it and known she probably hadn't eaten. She took the bag. She looked at him. You could have texted, she said. I was in the neighborhood, he said. You're never just in the neighborhood. No, he agreed, but I wanted to be. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the client's chair, which was its own strange thing, the chair where 237 people had sat with their hopes and their fears and their willingness to try. And he unwrapped a sandwich and set hers on the desk in front of her, and they ate lunch in her office while the city went about its business outside, and Dana pretended to be extremely occupied with something at her computer. It was, by any measurable standard, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It was also, though neither of them said this out loud, the most ordinary thing either of them had done in a very long time. And ordinary, they were both learning, was not the absence of something significant. It was what significant felt like once it had decided to stay.